Chapter 38. Jason glared at me the next day. I could feel his anger vibrating off of me. I put my head down on my desk to avoid having to look at him, but when I looked up again, I noticed he was twirling a pencil. He was always doing this, but then I noticed it wasn't just any ordinary pencil this time. It was my pencil, the one my dad got me. "Hey, give me that," I said, nearly jumping out of my chair. But Jason held the sparkly green pencil beyond my reach. I waved my hand frantically so that Mrs. Douglas could see what an emergency this was. "Yes, Mia," Mrs. Douglas said. "Jason stole my pencil," I said, narrowing my eyes at him. The words shot out of my mouth, sizzling hot. Mrs. Douglas turned to Jason. "Is that true?" Jason, expert faker that he was, feigned shock and outrage. "Of course not. Mrs. Douglas, this is my pencil. I would never take anything from Mia." "Liar!" I exclaimed. "That's enough, Mia," Mrs. Douglas said. "Both of you, up here now." She motioned with her finger for the two of us to come up to her desk. I stared at my sparkly pencil in Jason's hand, which he clutched tightly with his sticky, sweaty fingers, as we walked over to Mrs. Douglas. "Is this about what happened at Hot Seat?" Mrs. Douglas asked. "No," Jason blurted at the same time I said. "Of course it is." "He's mad I won," I told Mrs. Douglas. "So he had to take the one thing. Tears slammed into the back of my eyes as I tried to get the words out. "You didn't win. There's no winning in Hot Seat. There's only sitting," Jason said. "Give me the pencil," Mrs. Douglas said. Jason handed it to her. I watched as she turned it 360 degrees. "I don't see any name on it," Mrs. Douglas said. "That's because it costs $5.99, I told her. That wasn't a pencil. That was practically jewelry. You can't just write your name on a piece of jewelry." "Exactly, which is why it has to be mine," Jason pointed at me. "You really think she can afford something this nice?" My jaw dropped. What a thing to say. "I'm afraid without a name on it, we can't tell for sure whose it is," Mrs. Douglas said. I sucked in my breath, preparing for the worst. Mrs. Douglas was going to keep the pencil for herself. I should have known. She'd probably had her eye on it for days. "There's only one thing to do," Mrs. Douglas said. "Break the pencil in half." I gasped. How could she suggest such a thing? But before I could say anything, Jason shouted, "No, don't break the pencil in half. Let her have it." Mrs. Douglas smiled. "Now we know the true owner of the pencil is," she said. I held out a trembling hand. "Jason," she decided. Mrs. Douglas said that because I took so long responding to the proposal of breaking the pencil in half, I could not possibly be the rightful owner. And Jason, with his touching, heartfelt plea on behalf of the pencil, must be the rightful owner. So the pencil was his. It was the stupidest, most unfair thing I'd ever heard, and I had to bite the inside of my cheeks to keep from crying. On the way back to our desks, I turned to Jason and asked in a very small voice, "Please, Jason, can you give me my pencil back? It's very important to me." He thought for a second. "It's important to you, huh?" he asked. I nodded. Jason held my pencil up as if to give it to me, and I reached my hand out to take it. Then he whipped the pencil back, stuck out his tongue, and licked it. He licked my beautiful, sparkly pencil up and down with his nasty, evil tongue. I was so startled, I made a noise that came out as a half snort and half chirp, which only made him laugh. He stuck the pencil in his right pocket as the bell rang. School was over, and Jason walked off with the nicest thing I had.